love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again.
Hello and welcome to SDAQ&A. Great to have you here today. Those listening on season 2 on the podcast, this is 2025 and we are about to play the next episode of season 2 as we re-release that season onto the public into YouTube and beyond. Up until now, it has only been available inside the Facebook group. So those watching, if you'd like to go and listen to season 1 and 2 and uploading more every week on the podcast and listen while you're driving, go and check us out on your favorite podcast platform. Eventually, all these shows will be there. And some people enjoy listening via podcast. Wasn't yesterday's program amazing with Dr. Alan Davis and Ryan Day? Wow. I'm going to have to rewatch that program a few times, I think. There was so much material in there. And for those, again, listening to the podcast way back in season 2, episode 14, I think, you can listen to that Ryan Day and Dr. Alan Davis program on season 13, episode 34. So, welcome everybody. Good to see your comments. Keep them going throughout this program as we dive back in time. And also, don't forget, tomorrow we have Emma Ray doing our special Good News Fellowship at this exact time tomorrow, wherever you are watching. And cannot wait for that, our special Good News Fellowship weekly program. Okay, so I had asked Graeme Frauenfelder to join me today, but I'm not sure what's happened. I cannot... I hope he's okay. Graeme, if you're watching this right now, send me a message. I'd love you to join us as we rewatch this episode. Look, the season 2 series on Dr. Ford and Glacier View, mind-blowing, as refreshing and relevant today as they were 5 years ago. And so I think you'll really enjoy watching this with me today. Let's get into it. Jumping back in time, here I am with Graeme Frauenfelder, a legendary figure all around the world, but particularly in the North New South Wales conference in the 90s and 2000s and beyond. He and continues to have a huge influence on all things creative within the Adventist Church, and has really infused an incredible amount of love and fun into many, many events. And as I said, he continues to do so. So let's jump back in time and see what our conversation was like 5 years ago. Here we are with season 2, episode 14. Forget that we're going back in time. It's as if you're watching it live right now. I hope. Why isn't this playing? There we go. Welcome everyone to another SDAQ&A. I'm Peter Dixon, your host, and it's a real pleasure to welcome Graeme Frauenfelder to chat with us today. Hi, Graeme. Everyone's sending love hearts instead of clapping. So, as I like to do, I like to just kind of put a little bit of a connection between the people I interview and myself, whether I've crossed paths or where I've heard about their work. And Graeme and I go way back to Longburn days, 1976, when we were just young little whippersnappers. And I have a great story of the first time. I can actually say I know the first moment that I saw Graeme. And Graeme's mum had invited me over to get to know Graeme's younger brother, who was... I'm kind of between your younger brother and you, Graeme, age-wise. And Anyway, I walked in the hallway and I could hear this amazing music being played. I was a young, naive, sheltered Seventh-day Adventist. I hadn't been, exposed so much to rock music. And I could hear this great guitar solo, and it was coming from, and I even remember the song, it was coming from the song SOS by ABBA. And it's the one song where they have this really great guitar riff in it. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And then I saw you poke your head out of the door, and I kind of looked and waved and maybe gave a thumbs up, and then you disappeared again. And yeah, Graham, that led to me to start listening to Status Quo and Deep Purple and Black Sabbath and all sorts of rock music. You corrupted me, Graham.
I'm proud of it, Peter.
So it's great to be here. It's great to have you here.
Just
And
got to stay around with the ABBA as thank you for the music, and still got to figure out the money. It's a rich Peter's well.
and we crossed paths again at Avondale. We were both in the same class in 1981.
You were my guitar teacher.
I did a bit of guitar teaching for you. And one of the things I really want to kind of touch on today is that I was oblivious to Glacier View, to Des Ford. I knew who Des Ford was. I knew the church had issues. I knew we had tension between more liberal-minded people and the Concerned Brethren. I was very aware of that, but only when it kind of intersected and crossed over with music. And so I didn't fully understand it until the early 90s, where I kind of crossed paths with you again, and you gave me the book, the 1844, is it Revisited?
Re-examined by Robert.
Re-examined, right? Yeah, and I read that. This is about 91 maybe, and you also gave me the full transcript of the 1919 conference and a bunch of other interesting material. And I'd previously, in the late 80s, tried to read Ronald Number's book, The Health Prophetess, and also Walter Ray's White Lie, but I just couldn't. And so I kind of started to look into it, felt so challenged by it that it wasn't till the early 90s when you and I crossed paths that I began to kind of get that material across my desk again. And where I'm going with that is you were different to that. In the early 80s, you kind of, while you were at college, you had your finger on a bit of that
My
pulse.
eldest arrived.
Okay, you go and do that, and I'll just, share with people a little bit more about that time period. So when Graeme was at college, I know that he was more academically oriented and also very creative. He would do lots of pranks around the campus. But he had his finger on the pulse, I think, of church politics, and also the way things had been going on behind the scenes with Glacier View and Des Ford, and so I'm kind of wanting to unpack with Graeme today your memories of what was going on behind the scenes and what things were you aware of about Glacier View. And I'll stop talking in a second, but were you aware of the October 1979 forum? Had you listened to that tape? And then bring us up to with your thoughts on what was going on as a young person at that time.
Okay, for anyone who didn't hear Iris Yob yesterday, I really recommend you going and watching it. When Peter said pranks yesterday, I began my theatrical career playing pranks with others on Iris Yob, theatrical type ones in Education 1, and it was a very, very interesting semester. And she expanded my mind philosophically, educationally, to a whole alternate world than the mainstream. And that was pretty special for me. And it was beautiful listening to her take on spirituality. But just going back a little bit, I spent 10 years of my life from 9 till 19 at Longburn College. And that was living in a little Adventist bubble. I'd say for the time and the place, I wouldn't say this for everyone, but in some ways, like, there was beautiful community, so much that I gained from it. But there's also some cultish aspects that came from it all. Of, you know, there's the positive side and then there's the shadow side, and I'd like to talk more about that later, because everything has a shadow side. But living in this little bubble where we were the true and righteous ones, barely knowing a single person who was not part of the Adventist community, and learning that they are the evil ones, and even if they're nice now, unless they come over our side and keep the Sabbath in the last days, that they're the ones that are going to be persecuting, tormenting us, you know, the apostate Protestantism, all of that kind of thing. And so we were really brought up, not specifically, I don't remember it in worships in my home, but you'd read it, have it in literature, you'd have people preach about it, people talk about it. And some people will say, well, that's not real Adventism. Well, actually, there's the popular religion that is separate to what's written down in official documents. And it was really big, you know, knowing about the whole concept that we were told that you've got to look for every single sin that you've even forgotten. And if there's one unconfessed sin, you were just gone. And having a classmate's brother, you know, he had long hair and he was supposed to be a little bit wild. And look, I don't even know now whether he really was wild or whatever, but you know, he wasn't part of the kosher Adventist thing anymore, and he died in a car accident. And I just prayed and prayed that night, dear God, almost like praying back in time, God, please make it that he just had a moment before he went unconscious, that he had a chance to say, dear God, please forgive all my sins and wipe it all, otherwise he's just lost. You know, I remember a camp meeting that it was like, it's within 2 years, there's no way that unless, you know, within 2 years, Jesus is going to come. And, you know, there was all of this fervor that was going on. And then there was just hearing about all the time of trouble and all the persecution. The little book Now came out that, you know, just went through, and little plays were made and stories. And so there was a lot of beautiful spirituality we had, you know, God's a loving God and everything. And then you hear about this really angry God that really hates humans, and Jesus has to get in the middle to try and appease. A whole lot of mixed messages. And I took on the best of it, but I got the worst of it underneath as well. But one of the things that's very special about an Adventist community based around an educational institution, I will never say that anything in Adventist is liberal. If you want to know about liberal, go and do some reading in liberal theology and everything. And anyone that tries to say that we've got liberal theologians and liberal Adventists, you know, there'd be less than 0.01% that you'll find hanging around church. But in the classification of what people call liberal, around educational institutions where you have people that are thinking, exploring ideas, learning about how to think well, you cannot but help have a more liberating type of thing, of appreciation of diversity. And so I am blessed that we had teachers that really taught us how to think, you know, whether it was with Yvonne Den through literature, whether it was from Noel Maywald and Mike Tarleton and others, the science and maths teachers that really taught us about thinking. Like, we had to learn evolution for the curriculum, but we also learned creationism. But what I loved was Mike Tarleton would talk to us about, here's some of the things that that they don't really have the answers for with evolution, but then he'd go and say, here's things where the evolutionary theories make a lot more sense than the creationist ones. And he was willing to be really honest, not just, here's our ideology and we're going to squeeze everything in the box. And we got that in so many different areas. And we were at the end of this, coming through the 70s. So there was a more time of social liberation, even though we really didn't have it much in the church. But it was a new era, and we got flavours of that. And so I am really grateful for all of those good things. If a speaker came from the General Conference, or even outside of the Adventist faith, famous people back before James Dobson was a right-winger, but he was a child psychologist, and he came for a whole weekend. And the whole college just stopped, and we sat down at his feet and learned to understand kids. Could name so many different people that came. So we got the best. And then it was a young people's place. So there was loads of fun, recreational activities, the islanders and the Maoris, like the music, the culture, the warmth. How blessed we were to have all of that. And at the same time, there was this big thing that was there, that was you know, we have the truth, we're the right ones, the others are wrong, we're the minority. Massive loads of guilt and shame and rules. Oh my goodness, the rules. How many young people quit the church because of the rules on Sabbath? But my mum, even in spite of living in rule-based Adventism, my mum's always said, I want to make Sabbath the very best day of the week. And so there was the cultural side and the creative and spiritual and social side, where we had the best toys for Sabbath. We had our best clothes for Sabbath. You know, we lived really simply. Money wasn't big, but Sabbath, the food that we'd have, the desserts that we'd have, the people that we'd invite over, the bushwalking, the going out on the farms, the beach, community service things. Sabbath was a really, really special, and the beautiful rituals around it too. And so a beautiful, beautiful grounding. And I'm not feeling into it right now, but I've had massive pain and torture in my mind of the programming that comes from infancy, that just gets automatically programmed in the computer, that comes back to condemn and haunt as well. And so it holds both of those within my experience. But, you know, I came across Des Ford at a youth congress in Christchurch. I seriously couldn't really remember that I'd heard him, except afterwards Mum said, oh, one of the teachers who had been baptised recently just raved and raved about Des. And I was like, I hadn't heard about this guy before. I was more taken with, trying to think what his name is, big, tall, African-American guy from the GC. He was just a storyteller. He made me look like a midget. He could slam dunk basketballs without even leaving the ground, I reckon. And the stories that he would tell and the animation and that whole Black African way of presenting and preaching, he's the one I remember. But I remember that somebody said, oh, Des Ford, and he did morning devotionals and people loved it. In years later, my mum told me that Des had introduced her through camp meetings to really getting Jesus in the gospel, and that she had no doubt of her assurance of salvation. And so she loved that. But later on, when it came around the 1844, my mum was a traditionalist and she wasn't happy about that. But in New Zealand, I didn't know about any of the controversies that were going on. That just wasn't part of wasn't part of anything. And I'll let you ask a question in a minute, but just a little context. We had, Harry Ballas comes into the picture in that a bunch of Avondale students came over to do prac teaching, and Harry had come and spent time with his fiancée, Christine, at the time. And I remember when they came one year, and in our Bible classes, it was either Noel Maywald or Alan French. I remember Harry coming and talking to us about different things, and here's one about, the true biblical history around wine. And, it just made sense. And then I remember some of them talking about the rule-based thing, and they talked about the gospel and Jesus and freedom, and then talked about things like, drinking coffee is not the evil sin of everything. They talked about there's a whole lot of things around health, but to make them this life and death matter and this big thing around guilt and shame and, terrible and evil, it's like, yes, be healthy, make your choices. But they challenged a lot of that incredible rule-based thing. And I used to think, we heard there were 400 rules plus for the Sabbath with the Jews. And I did an assignment on the Sabbath once, and I just got the index of Ellen White and found way more than 400 references to rules for Sabbath keeping for Adventists. And I just thought, how can we jump on the Jews for all their rules when how many rules do we live by? Mm. And so I remember these students from Avondale weren't able to come to class and do the Bible class things, just the chit-chats with us anymore. And it was kind of not blowing up a big deal, but it was like...
the one that Harry spoke about the other day.
It was Harry and some of the others, yeah. And I got their enthusiasm. They really got Jesus. And they got this freedom spirit. And then there was a thing, they're not allowed to talk about that. The last New Zealand thing is around 1844, very spiritual kid, love going to prayer meeting, take my mum or my dad, walk through the dark over the college or up the road to people's homes. And one time there was something about 1844 mentioned, and the whole, like the package, we didn't go into the whole details. And I pulled out Daniel 8:14 and I read around it, and it was like, how do they make up this massive theology out of this? And Alan French was the Bible teacher, and he gave us a 10-page assignment to do at the end of second term, was when it was due, or the beginning of third term. And we could choose it on anything from the Bible. And so I asked myself, how do Adventists come up with the whole big package around 1844?
Wow.
And I was trained well that here's the answer and let's prove it, which is not actually the way things really work. It's more like ask a question and explore all the possibilities. I spent my whole holidays just reading and reading. I started reading from Genesis, even though it wasn't the assignment, and just read and read and read and was avidly reading. Then I went to the library and I got every single book I could get. I found only a few things that people not Adventists said. And then I found so many apologetics for the Adventist way. And so I went 36 pages for this assignment. I wanted to send it off to the review to publish as one of those tiny little books they used to have on things, and comprehensively proving every single little bit by reading Adventist literature and summarising it all, and finding anything that people disagreed with. And of course, there wasn't much around that I found, but any of those, finding the reasons to answer against them.
So you were being an apologist for 1844.
Yes. And I even used Des Ford's Daniel book that was in the library. And he wasn't as explicit as he was in his other thing, his big document. But I remember Alan French gave me an A+, and he said, there's no such thing as an A+, but I'm blown away how comprehensively you've researched and studied. And for all your work and thoughtfulness, you get an A+. But he said, I just want you to know that things are more complex and not as black and white as you might make out. And I thought I'd found all the answers then. And then that's when, a year later, my dad got invited to Avondale College and got dropped only months after the 1979 talk. Got dropped at Cooranbong, living on campus in the heart of things. Des Ford hadn't made much of a mark in New Zealand but when I was there. But in my life, I walked into the hotbed of Australian Adventism in January 6 or 7, 1980.
Wow. And because you had an interest in that already, you'd done a lot of deep research. Do you still have that 36-page document?
It's somewhere in my garage is overwhelmed. I'm about to start a hoarding program to try and let go, release.
Well, don't throw away stuff that you find like that. I think that's important stuff to reflect on and to ponder and to use as a bit of a pivot point for where you are now. I think it'll be very healthy.
Well, I have another document I wrote in the late 90s called What 1844 Did to Me.
Right. I didn't know that.
Which was after I'd studied at Avondale, worked for the church, been through the best of church work and the suffering of church work, and then wrote that and cried my way through. And it wasn't just about 1844, but it was the package of the church experience. And I wrote it wondering which church administrator I would give it to so they could see what's inside. But I'll give you that document to publish one day when I find it.
If you'd been 10 years older, a lot of what you were doing, you would have been in the mix with the other academics. If you'd been born 10 years earlier, I mean. So tell me about your observations. You land on the doorsteps of Avondale.
Well, I came into Avondale.
Right of it all.
It would have taken a little while to have picked it all up because we're there in the holidays. But meeting at, all the faculty used to get together and have a retreat before college started. So I would have been in the mix of it all then. But I spent a year working at the factory as a cleaner to raise money to go to college. And the cleaning department basically was mostly was afternoon work, was theology students.
Right.
And so if it had just been any old person working in the cleaning department, it would have been a different experience. But walking around the factory, working on projects like cleaning big rooms, dirty rooms together, they'd be talking, I'd be listening in, I'd be talking, absorbing. So I had somebody, I think of his name, Jonathan someone, he got a hold of Ron Graybill's thesis that had been supposedly put on secret hold for 10 or 20 years, that was about Ellen White compared to Mary Baker Eddy, and I wonder who the others, there were 3 or 4 women leaders, and it was quite a controversial one, and then somehow it got released.
Oh, wow.
I had that. This is before the internet. This is before emails.
Yeah.
This is like someone in the know who knew someone in the know who knew someone in the know got it and said, do you want a copy? And I got this one.
Wow.
I had Des Ford's thesis before, probably while Glacier View was on, I had the thesis. And I can't remember if it came through from Brinsmead's organisation or through that mailing list. Somehow I got a thing in the mail, would you like it, $45? And so Darren McGrath borrowed it some years later and I never got it back. So if you're listening, Darren. So I'm a thinker. I like hearing ideas. I like hearing perspectives. And you couldn't help but live in Kurrambong and be surrounded by this. They had an Association of Adventist forums and I was just in my element. Here I am around where people are talking and discussing and thinking and feeling and exploring ideas. Like, that's me. And I've loved being at Longburn, but here we've stepped up into a whole nother level of deep thinking. And so I signed up to go down to Crosslands for the weekend. And they had, Alan Salem was there and what's his name?
This is early 81, is it?
80.
Oh, in 80. Right.
Was it The Shaking of Adventism?
Oh,
Paxton.
Right.
What's his name? Paxton. He was an interested observer, an Anglican guy, wrote an amazing book. And I loved hearing from outside. What's the observations from outside of us? And so I signed up to go, and my dad, being a faculty, he had someone came and said, how they found out, I don't know, but I don't think that your family member should be going. This is not okay. And I had no resistance from my mum or dad. It was just letting me know that people haven't. Dad's like, Graham's old enough to look after himself. So what a fascinating weekend, mixing and mingling with so many ideas being put around.
Wow.
Very fascinating. And then all the discussions and everything around college. I attended Memorial Church. And Jim Coffin was the youth part, big attraction, big youth group. And I did the public speaking course with Jim. And every night we had to do a speech. And often after my talks would be, one of the comments would be, unusual as usual. I love taking different topics. They did one on tithe. So it wasn't that I was against tithe, but I took the not even the devil's advocate view, but I looked for alternate ways of looking at things. And, the biblical tithe is very different what Adventists tell us how you should do tithe. It's much more interesting, actually. But there was one that I called the heresy of Jesus. And I used Jesus' story about the rich man and Lazarus and the rich man in hell. And it was like, Jesus used this hell story. And what's going on here? Like, that's just theologically for Adventism so not right. And so I was trying to find a bridge saying, for my understanding of the time, perhaps God, like Jesus used something out of the pop culture of the time, or the culture at the time, he took that to tell a story that was for some greater point with the familiarity. And I was suggesting that perhaps the whole thing around 1844 and the big hang-ups and everything we have is that was a big movement at the time, and that was a big thing at the time. And could there be that instead of getting hung up all over all the little technicalities and details, and let alone the whole unhealthy theology that pop culture Adventism, and some would say mainstream, had, that maybe that was just one of those things that the divine used as part of the journey, and that, you know, Jesus used the heresy thing. Maybe he found something that wasn't quite kosher, but to guide. And I was with people that were right amongst the very conservative, not any particular CB, because they would already know that they're great preachers, but I had people that were very conservative, and there was no rancor. There was no, how dare you question, however you ask. I felt loved. I felt listened to. It was very healthy for a young person to be able to go on a journey to question and all of that, not to have people saying you're not allowed to think that way, you're not allowed to ask those questions, hop back in your box, this is the answer, you got to go there. It was amazing. It was really amazing to have that openness and freedom.
So you're kind of mingling with what we're calling, within the context of Adventism, liberal Adventists, as well as the conservative Adventists. What was the vibe on campus? Because you had the ability to connect with the staff as well. And I just, in chatting to Iris yesterday, I got the feeling that the staff had a camaraderie and a kind of a way to support each other that the rest of us kind of didn't. But I do remember that you were kind of invited a little bit into the fold there. So you had a bit of a really...
I felt like an outsider. Like, I moved to Murwillumbah to do some youth work when I was a youth director later.
Yeah.
We were looking for a place, and Anthony Mitchell was helping me, and he said to the guy who's the landlord of one place, you know, you're a local? He said, oh, no, I'm not a local. I've only been here 20 years. You've got to be born here. You know, I could die here and I'd not be a local. It was a little bit like that. There was a lot of the people who had been through Avondale for a long, long time. So I wasn't right at the heart of it, but simply because my parents were staff, we got embraced. And
I do mean, though, that you have an ability to connect with all walks of life, and people kind of embrace you into their fold. And so I'm interested in, as you were kind of, even if you were just on the fringes of those little groups, you know, the conservative group, the faculty group, students. In my opinion, students weren't really talking about it much at that time.
So I think it might have been a bit different.
The late 70s, like the late 70s as a young kid, because I was almost a kind of a local, because, you know, my dad had been there in the 60s, and I went to Avondale Primary School, Avondale High School, taught at Avondale College. Went to Avondale College, taught music there for a little while.
Well, you were, I always thought that you were nearly half a decade younger than me. Now it turns out we're just over a year different in age. But I've been pondering where you talk about you lived in a different world to it and then caught up later. I think one thing is being immersed in the faculty vibe there. Another one is you had music and surfing.
Yeah.
I was cleaning at the factory and listening to theology. Although I was an indoor student.
Yes.
So it was a different world for indoors and outdoors. Like,
I think
we were in the shower block together, we're walking to meals together, we're mixing and chatting.
Totally.
It was living and breathing with each other all the time. You go to Sabbath school and church together and then go and have Sabbath lunch together.
You though had an ability to explore what was being talked about. So you and I had the similar go to bed at night wondering if probation's closed. I've just remembered a sin that I did 5 weeks ago. Oh no, what if my probation's closed? I can't get forgiveness for that now. And my response was, instead of kind of digging deeper into the why of all of that, is I went into escapism with the music primarily. And so with music, I found a community of
surfing drugs.
I didn't have any of the drugs. I just had the music and
the music and the surfing is the natural drugs.
And they were sufficient enough to kind of distract me, and and I think I used them as distractions during that time period. But you had the academic nous and the desire, and just being a little bit older, you kind of had already seen some of this stuff coming along. Like even at Longburn, I would have been 14 when you were 16, and that couple of years just gives you a bit more of an insight. And so what I'm kind of trying to dig into is that with that, you delved into it, you're accepted by the different groups. What was it, what did you notice happening on campus at that time that I missed? What was going on, or was it all behind closed doors?
Okay. A few things. One of them I would say, I think I remember my best theological conversations were over Sabbath lunch. And I would throw out things. I've always was like the good kid, the compliant kid, but I had my own. If I got naughty, it was when the adults weren't around. And even in class, they'd be playing up and Mr. Tarvin would leave the science lab. And I'd be right in the middle, and then I'd have this feeling like we've gone a bit far, and I'd sit down and do my books, and then the door opened. They'd get busted, get hard labour, and I'd come in to see another teacher on Sunday, and they're like, how come you're not doing hard labour with us? And I'm like, I just had this sense when the adults were about to show up. And so there's a bit of that mischievous, naughty, devil's advocate streak in me. And at Avondale, that really came out, like the social thing, the lunch thing, the spiritual day. I would get there and say, I think the 10 Commandments have been done away with. And there'd be shock, horror around the people at the table. And it wasn't that I believed it, but I loved the debating, the arguing point, but there wasn't a viciousness. I didn't see the pouncing that came later.
Yeah.
It was like, how could you? What are you thinking with that? And then I'd ask them where theirs were. And I just had lots of fun with that kind of thing, of exploring ideas. And somebody needs to take the opposing views or the different opposing views. Dr. Lindsay had a class on Christian education. When he was doing it on rock music, young people that were so full into, contemporary rock music. I was musically illiterate. But I was the one that was arguing how important it was, and I'd get lyric sheets out of record. I'd go in the record shop and I'd copy some lyrics and I'd read them out, and I'm arguing for it while the ones who listen to it are saying how evil it is. And I was thinking, why you're doing this to get the good brownie points? But I took the opposite picture, what I thought Dr. Lindsay would have on everything.
Mm.
And I got it wrong sometimes, but I like to stir the class for our discussions. But there was one, I thought Dr. Lindsay was quite conservative. And I would say he's a conservative man, but there were things I didn't know about him. I didn't know how gospel-focused he really was. And there was a question that really came up, and I can't remember what it was now. That was one of those defining questions. And so I got there taking the full right out there gospel approach, expecting Dr. Lindsay to give me some resistance. And he was on my side arguing for it against some of the others.
Yeah.
And I really got, I get to know. This was more in 93. But
in my growing up years, the influence of grace and kindness and a positive view of the gospel, I got more from Dr. Lindsay than anyone else.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting blend of conservative, liberal.
See, I didn't.
Lots of good stuff going on, but some crazy stuff going on.
Conservative, liberal back then. We didn't talk about the one thing that got talked about was the CBs, because it was very obvious that they were anti-Avondale, and the anchor was out. You just knew about it. OK. Anderson used to drive up and down the drive and pick up students and give them a ride and ask, some of my dorm mates would say he picked us up and he was trying to get us to tell, the bad things about Avondale. And one year for the Jacaranda banquet, if you sold more than 10, you got an entry. And it's the afternoon before the deadline, and George Tasker hadn't sold enough, and I said, how about we just go up to the old folks home, we'll just knock all the doors in the village, a retirement village. I said, they'll love Avondale. And anyway, OK Anderson bought one from him for $10, took an order. And you could have who prize for who sold the most, who did the guy the most, the girl the most. And one of them was the most interesting or most unusual sale. And so we nominated George selling it to OK Anderson, who was so anti-Avondale. And of course, nobody won that award that year. It was probably the only unusual one that was put in. But OK would turn up at college and come and have his wedding anniversary in the dining room and get up and tell everyone that I met my wife here. And so there was kind of a love, but we knew that there was a group of them that were really out to get it.
Yeah, it was weird because you'd kind of have your Sabbath lunches chatting very amicably with these guys and run into them in the street and whatever. But then you'd find out that I'd be at a gig and there'd be someone there taking photos and just giving it back, and then that'd come out in an Anchor magazine, Anchor newsletter or the Remnant Herald or something.
And I know for a few years later...
But I never felt they were being two-faced, though.
No.
The hard thing to explain.
Well, they were the ones that I knew that were, and I didn't know when I hear what Harry and some of the others talk about. I'd always thought, I knew that there was a concerted effort and there was a fight for when we talk about the old Adventism, for the little bit that I've read, when America went into its fundamentalist phase back around the 1990 Bible Conference was in the beginning of Christianity in America really hitting a fundamentalist phase. And Adventism went also into that very fundamentalist phase. And so sometimes we think that fundamentalist phase has to have been from the beginning, and maybe some of it was, but I think we got caught up as a church in that phase. And, you know, the 60s and 70s were a whole social revolution, or to some people in society. There was a whole loosening up. And I see that there's the old guard that come from the fundamentalist era. And then there's the new post-war generation that's coming with peace and love and freedom and thinking and education and travel and all kinds of things. So I can understand that they're hanging on and fighting to keep it going. So I knew it was around, but we still had open, honest discussions. Like I remember, whether it was before or after Glacier View, Norm Young doing a lunchtime forum in the cafeteria lounge for anyone who wanted to come and sharing some of his perspectives. And there wasn't the big sense of this guy's on the right side or the wrong side or anything. It was like, we have ideas to talk about.
Was that because we were in the Adventist bubble where there was a lot of support for that? Like if at that exact time we're talking about, 180 ministers being kicked out, and we've listened to John Hammond's memories and recollections of that time, and it sounds like there was a purging going on that we may not have totally grasped because did you know that was going on at the same time too?
Well, the purging took place after Glacier View.
Yeah.
And it was August in 1980.
That's what I mean, in the early 80s.
So the big purging, it was like there's a little bit, I don't know exactly when everyone lost it, but it wasn't like overnight everyone got called in. So that 1980, before I went to college, was very much, there was a lot going on, while Des is writing his manuscript. And we didn't have social media. We didn't really know a lot what was going on.
And there was always a delay in getting to know things.
That's why I'd go to these different events to pick up what was happening. Where I became aware of the firings, not of Des, like I was following that quite closely with the local community and Evangelica magazine, Adventist Currents, I think was one, which you couldn't get. You couldn't go into the library and get. But my Japanese theology student friend, he would go and had special permission, and he knew to ask, and he had to go into the archives and he'd ask, and they'd let him take it out and read it.
Oh, wow.
Like I'd go down with him and read it. But that whole freedom of information, there's a lot that wasn't out there. But 1981, I moved into the dorms. So I'd been a cleaner the year before. I moved into the dorms, and my roommate was Murray Krah. And Murray's dad had just been fired.
Oh, okay.
And so it became very, very close.
Right.
Where I'm hearing the human side. It's not just, oh, there's a pastor and he doesn't believe something and he's had to leave.
No.
This is getting very close, very close. And so every night to sit there and have times chatting about how his family's going, how his dad's going, what it's like for him.
Tell us some of your recollections of what he was saying.
Look, I don't remember the details, but all I know, the shock, the pain, the suffering, the just getting kicked out. You know, if I knew what I knew now, or even just in years later, it would have been interesting to have gone back to have teased out some more. But it was kind of just like, that's what I'm living in. I had a roommate, someone Crabtree, I can't remember his name, Dwayne Crabtree, was next door, and he had Robert Brinsmead's Judged by the Gospel. And I remember reading that, and I enjoyed following Robert Brinsmead through the years. I got the Verdict magazine from I got my own post box in Cooranbong because wasn't sure about having it coming to my home. When I was a student at college, definitely not having it turn up on the front desk, as our mail got put in letters in little boxes, but any magazines put out the front. There was a thing like, better be careful.
Wow.
Be careful, on very little money, make sure I have my own mailbox to have all of those things go to. And so I enjoyed, this is kind of an aside, but I actually really enjoyed watching Robert Brinsmead's journey of questioning and unfolding, and he did quite a spiritual journey. He went through from, he'd been the fundamentalist many, many years before I knew about him, and then he'd really found a whole gospel thing, and then he started re-examining lots of different doctrines. But he also, I think that he looked at some sociology type stuff too. Like he would look at the nature of prophets versus priests, and how we need to have a balance between the prophets that are the stretching the paradigms and challenging, and the priests that are creating stability and order. And that if one, it just gets too out of hand, the other one, it's just too rigid. And yet how we took what we saw as Ellen White prophecy, turned it into this part of the priesthood and the control. And so there was all kinds of things that he wrote about that fascinated me. And then his journey over the years, not just in those immediate years, but watching him go into a more, the freedom and the Holy Spirit thing, and then moving beyond into liberal Christianity, and then beyond that, and then he stopped publishing, I think. I'm fascinated by the psychology, by the sociology, by spiritual journeys. And so I found a lot of interesting stuff there with Robert. But I still found, I knew it was tough times, that there was a war battling, but I turned up at my first year at study, and we had Bernie Brinsmead for the New Testament one, where we did half of the Gospels.
Are they brothers?
So,
how are they related?
So Bernie would be some relation,
Yeah.
nephew or something, cousin.
Yeah.
Oh, Bernie was the most beautiful, gentle-souled man of such authenticity, integrity. And the Gospels came alive like I had never, ever seen. And he largely read from his notes. I'd go to lunch and tell a joke at lunch, and they said, Bernie, in the lecture, he writes his jokes into his notes. But I went and talked to him just about assignments, and just a profound, beautiful human soul, so spiritual, and just his love of Jesus. And then Norm came in second semester, and he didn't have control of the class like Bernie did. And those of us who've been teachers, some of us know there's other people that are really good at controlling a class. Norm didn't, but Norm, his embrace of the gospel too was profound. And so those two guys, one each semester, was pretty amazing. And then I had John Cox teaching us about the Bible as literature.
Mm.
And I'd never thought of the Bible as literature. It was a book of random Bible doctrinal texts, but they weren't all put in the same place. There's one here, one there, one there, one there, and you've got to find them. Why didn't God just put them, we'll do this one, we'll do that one, do that one? There's a bunch of stories, there's a bunch of weird stuff, there's a bunch of boring stuff, but really stories and doctrinal texts mixed up. Bible is literature. Oh my.
Mm.
And Ecclesiastes. Going through that. And like life is meaningless. And we use the text proving the state of the dead, but it says, the living know that they're alive and the dead know nothing. They're gone. They're finished forever. Doesn't say till the resurrection, it's forever.
Yeah.
There's so much in there. There's depression in there. There's nihilism in there. There's almost a healthy hedonism there. Live in this moment. Enjoy the food and the drink and the company of the ones you love. There's a recognition of the unfairness of life. The rich flourish and the poor get sick and die before their time. There was so much. And then he tried women, he tried booze, he tried eating, he tried everything. He even said he tried religion. That was one of the things John said. He even tried religion, but it didn't satisfy. But it was when he embraced life and living fully. And in the moment, it's like, wow.
And you got this from going to Dr. Cox's classes.
Biblist literature, yeah. And then just with Iris Shaw, she's teaching us about Steiner education, about A.S. Summerhill, A.S. Neal and his Summerhill school. Radical stuff. And philosophers, and like, I'm just in heaven being in this place where we are exploring. And there was no sense, we better not talk about that. No, that's not Adventist. I didn't get that in my first year. But then something changed.
Tell us about it. Oh, before you go there, don't forget, but when you heard the news of Glacier View and Des being defrocked, did it affect you emotionally, or was it more of an analytical kind of thought process about it? Did you feel, or did you just sense something had happened?
I trusted that it was actually, I thought it was a good, healthy thing that a person was given 6 months. And it wasn't just Des, it was a policy. There was someone else I knew that had questions, and they gave him 6 months or 3 months to go away and ponder, to write, and to come and have a chat. I thought that's a healthy thing. And he wrote so much. I thought, isn't that wonderful? They come from all over the world to come and actually listen, to read, to listen, to study. That sounds very healthy to me. I didn't know the politics behind it.
No. So therefore you probably didn't have that emotional sadness.
And we didn't have the internet to know straight away.
Yeah.
It had to be when someone came and said,
and told you.
So it took time to find out what happened.
And secondhand news often.
But when I find from people who were there, and then Des later talking about, they listen, they come up with the consensus. Then I found out that many of them hadn't even read the document.
Yeah.
That it wasn't a way. It was set up as an impartial thing to explore. And I thought, that's a great step for a church. That's honesty. My dad would often quote Ellen White, humans are to be thinkers and not mere reflectors of other men's thoughts. Mum used to quote the one, truth, and I don't know if it's an Ellen White one or whether it's a pseudo Ellen White one, but truth can stand any investigation of itself. They were very strong in my consciousness. And I believed that that's what they were doing. And when I found out of all the dirty things that were done, the unethical things, the illogical things, the way that there were people that had their predetermined outcomes, it was a shock, devastation, disillusion. Just, how could anyone do that?
Do you feel that the concerned brethren and the leadership that kind of supported them had a leg to stand on because they were like, wow, this new theology is totally shifting Adventism as we know it, Adventism as is written and still sold in the bookshops, represented in Great Controversy book. Did they have a right to kind of stand up and fight for their church, what they saw as their church?
You know, this will come to a later point I have to make, but everyone has a right to speak, to share their thoughts, to dialogue.
Mm.
I have a big problem with control
Mm.
and manipulation, but I have an even bigger issue with unkindness and cruelty.
Yeah.
And I'll come to that in a little while. That, and, you know, in hindsight, thinking, Jesus said, love your enemies. And Des Ford and these pastors were put up as the enemy.
Mm.
And the cruelty of the treatment, as I'm like, where does Jesus fit into all of that? But
Yeah.
if you're going to follow Jesus and these people are your theological enemies, how can you love them? Or do you have to throw Jesus out? And that's where George Knight wrote a book, Angry Saints. And I don't know if I've got the subtitle right, but it was The Frightening Possibility of Being Adventist Without Being Christian. And I'm not so far to say they weren't Christians, but I get what he means. We've all flawed. But it is dangerous. Angry Adventists are very dangerous if the ideology counts the most.
And they seem to be quite good at being organised and monetised and focused. And so that's, I think, why the rise from concerned brethren to influence over the leadership to monetising and eventually getting to top level position is an important thing to study and to look at.
Well, there's a dilemma in all of this for those of us who are more open and diverse. I've heard the studies that conservative churches that have really strong doctrines and behavioural standards and everything grow faster than other ones. And it's like, that's supposed to be proof that they're good.
No.
But to me, that's a proof of a certain amount of control and uniformity. Whereas the more that we grow in our own selves and our lives, the less we're attached and need. I don't need my local Adventist church to fill all my needs.
No.
I go so many places to get my needs filled and satisfied that people that are more diverse in their thinking or find not so attached to a particular narrow way that has to be the right one, that's going to hold itself much stronger, because if you lose some of that, people are devastated.
Yeah.
Whereas the other one is like, I don't need to get it from here.
No.
I can go on a journey. The whole world is there for me to explore.
What's sad is that those who do appreciate that diversity don't realise what's around the corner once the people that are more black and white in their understanding of truth, once they get control, it diminishes the realm and the space you have to embrace that diversity. And I've seen it gradually being diminished over the last 20 years.
Can I come to something that I got very confused in those 2 years before I went to Pakistan for a year, and that changed everything. But 80, 81, I got confused because I would read whatever came out. And back in those days, without the internet and without, photocopies weren't a big thing back then either. Like as a teacher, you used the Gestapo.
I was just about to do that.
So any information, it wasn't like there was loads of stuff.
No.
And it was before the video era too. So the cassette tapes out, and I was never big on the cassette tapes, but I did have Des's one and the response. But I was confused because I grew up with that grounding in that old Adventism and the pop Adventism. Like if you tell the story of Genesis, ask any born and bred Adventist, they'll have all these details in it that actually aren't in the Bible. They come from Ellen White. and she's fleshed out the stories. But there's this thing that the pop culture Adventism, and we don't, often when we're bred in it, we don't exactly know which is actually from there and which is from here. But I would listen to, you know, and it wasn't like I'd only heard Des for that youth congress, and I hadn't really, they were a nice worship, but I never thought, this is Des, this is something different. I'd more heard all the different preachers at Avondale, which were all the different staff, with all their perspectives on life, not just on theology. And we didn't have a pastor then that was there every Sabbath.
Yeah.
So it was all of these academics and others that just saw the world. You had a geographer, a mathematician, a scientist, a theologian, educator, like,
and I think
richness.
I think that too, just sorry to interrupt, but I think the important thing to note is Des wasn't trying to say, this is my view, gather around it. He was saying, what's happening with all these creative and exciting people and the thinking, that's what we live and die to support. Die metaphorically, which he did. And I think that's what we grieve, not the loss of Des's voice, but the loss of Des's voice and all the other voices who went into silence eventually by the end of the 80s and through to the 90s.
Yeah, and like listening to Iris, I wasn't aware of the pain and suffering that they were going through.
No.
Avondale people who are students and colleagues of Des. I didn't know that bigger picture. Like, I could have assumed and known a bit, but just thinking about when the uncertainty is who's going to be next. And I would read the CB stuff, and, you know, it made sense to me. And so I'd swing fully into that. And then I'd read something from a different magazine, and it made sense. And then I started reading some stuff about different other Christian or on the edge of Christian movements and outside of Christianity then. And when I read them, they made sense. And I thought, so how do I know what's true?
Yeah.
And there were two answers that I came up with. The first one is to do with loyalty to the church, because that had been drummed in. We have to be loyal to the church. And I thought to myself, if our loyalty is to the church and the leaders of the church and specific things of the church, what happens if the church moves off on a tangent? What is going to bring it back?
And that's what Ellen White was concerned about, and why she was so involved in getting the unions off the ground, to stop this kind of leadership going the wrong track.
My big answer for in that time was, it has to be that we have a focus on Jesus. That we can swing off on all tangents. We can get caught up in, like the Pharisees, in different ways. We can get hooked into our own beliefs or certain people, or this leader said it, so we're going to do it. The general conference said no this, so we don't do it. But what's going to keep everything in track? It's like, we've got to have something bigger, and we've got to have focus on Jesus. That was one of my prime ones.
And that brings me, I want to come back to Pakistan.
I've still got to...
I want to go back to that. Don't forget that. But it's interesting that what we kind of are wanting to fight for is the ability to do those things that you're saying, to be able to have a variety of people expressing their thoughts, to focus around an anchor in a belief of the teachings of Jesus. But that the people that don't want that are militant in trying to stop it happening. And so later on, I want to come back to that and have your thoughts on how that can be addressed.
Yeah.
Now back to what you were saying.
The second one was bigger than just the Christian thing of the focusing on Jesus. And back then it was a general Jesus. Later it came to not just the words of Jesus, but the spirit of Jesus. And that's when I came back from Pakistan, that's what really hit me. But just before we hit the Pakistan bit, the other thing I started thinking, so if they're making it all logical and everything makes sense, why is it making sense? And then I realized it's the presuppositions we have are the foundations for our thinking. And so if I accept this, and this about the Bible, I start at that. they are not necessarily things that can be proved by the Bible. They're a cultural and academic, a historical, family life experience thing, and tied in with theology. But if I accept this, then my logic takes me up here.
Mm.
But if I have a different approach from a different set of presuppositions, then I can argue all the logic and I come up here.
Mm.
And that started me thinking about thinking.
Right.
And thinking about belief systems, that it's no longer is Des right or is the CB's right, but let's step back behind it and let's start looking at the landscape of religious belief and any belief. So a very rich time for formulating, and I wouldn't have had that if it hadn't been for the competing ideas and the fighting for ideas.
Mm.
There's a gift
You
in that.
became metacognitive.
Mm. Get ready for the big bombshell.
Continue.
So I'm talking quite passionately about all of this time, but I'm not tapping into right now and feeling the deep emotions. But there was a lot of hurt, sadness, disillusion, anger, empathetic feeling with the suffering of the different people that I was hearing about. And, you know, that is all boiling away in the surface. But I personally, other than my roommate's dad, I personally hadn't come across anyone that had lost their job. But there was knowing about it, and there was turmoil, there was all kinds of stuff. At the end of the year, I applied and ended up getting a volunteer job in Pakistan for a year. And I remember going to Victorian camp on the way, and there out the front is the shepherd's rod. They have their little caravan like in Nostradamus kid by what's his name? Bob.
Not Larson, was it?
No. I'll come to it sometime. I went to university with his daughter.
You got me into that movie. That was a great watch.
And there's a little caravan, and it was like that's what they had out the front. And here was someone like Adventisms of the minority that are holding the world as not at all wrong. And then there's these handfuls that are like, you church, you haven't got it all right.
Yeah.
And I had this big adventure to go to Pakistan. And as soon as it was known I was going, there was somebody would go to my brother and tell him, I don't think your brother should go to Pakistan. It's dangerous.
Mm.
And somebody, I don't know if it was him or somebody else, put little notices up on the notice board about a missionary that was killed in a certain place in far away.
Well, it was dangerous.
And at the same time, they call it the Cold War, which is anything but the Cold War, where Russia and Afghanistan and Russia and America had their killing fields in Afghanistan and fighting. So the Cold War means there was no bloodshed in America and USSR. But as I learned history later, the bloodshed and the pain and the suffering that went with them fighting in other countries. And so there's the shepherd's rod with some little technicalities about prophecy and things Adventists don't have right. And I'm heading over to a part of the world that is one of the poorest, totally Muslim, totally different to anything. Big adventure. Another one of my freedoms, I'm on the plane flying over and I don't know anybody, so it's like, would you like a wine? Well, I want to try. I want to see what it's like. I didn't like it, but I tried one of each on the way over. A sense of freedom of leaving my world behind. I left Longburn behind. I left my family of strict mum and tight family to go to Avondale, which was all of a sudden freedom and liberation. And now I'm from my own country. And I get to Singapore and spend a week, and it was an Asian country, but there was lots of similarities to here. It was just a bit different. But I went to the airline check-in lounge, and it felt like I was about to leave to a different planet. Everything was different. The atmosphere was different. The clothing was different. The language was different. And I got on the plane and landed in this big city of Karachi. 8 million, and I wake up in the morning to the sound of no vehicles, just the pounding. Look out the window and someone's pounding with rocks and water the clothes to wash and clean them. And I end up in this country where Russia had told Pakistan was supporting the Afghanis. They let the freedom fighters come and recoup. They were helping make the weapons there. They had been told if they didn't recognize the regime, if they let the freedom fighters come in, if their weapons went over, then they had declared war on Russia and they could be bombed. And I saw places where there'd been bombing. I went to Upper Valley where you could see the big almost pyramid concrete blocks laid across the valley to keep the tanks coming through or slow them down. And we were able to drive to the border of Afghanistan. We were told that week there won't be any bombing. These sources said it's safe. So we drove up to the border.
Wow.
And so I'm living in a place where there's Russian people on the streets. There's Americans. I would often be asked, if I went down the street, I would be surprised to see a pale-skinned person. It's like, what do they think they're doing here? It was not many foreigners at all. But I travel the buses, walk the streets. And I was often asked, you Russian? I say, no. Are you American? No, that's good for both of them. Where are you from? Australia. Ah, Australia, you play cricket. Oh, all barriers went. There were times where the Americans would have the American embassy ring up and say, just don't go out on the streets. There's been something happen in Israel. When Palestinians were attacked in some way, they'd have that Friday, there'd often be a no-car day and rocks would be thrown. And sometimes yes and sometimes no. And the Americans would hear, don't leave your place. And then we'd get a message, it's not good to go out or whatever. And I'd catch a tuk-tuk and just go in and, if the traffic was moving. But it was huge. The war, you knew the war was on. You knew stuff was happening. But to have that just open welcoming is, you're Australian, you belong here. And then when they play cricket, I remember one time the Aussies were hitting too many 4s and 6s and they started throwing rocks and stuff onto the field and the Aussies walked off. When they came back half an hour later, they got more, so they left. And I actually someone gave me tickets to go after school and I missed out. And I thought, yeah, that's third world for you. It's only a year or two later, I was back in Australia. And I think it was it the British or someone was doing way better than the Aussies. I can't remember who it was. West Indies, maybe it was Pakistan, I don't know. And it was the Aussie yobbos were throwing beer cans and stuff onto the field. And the foreigners walked off and came back and it kept going. And so they walked off. And I just thought, I learned to stop judging because I saw Pakistan through the eyes of the West and I saw all the things they didn't have that we had. The corruption that was there. And then I came back to Australia to find out the massive corruption in the New South Wales police force and all the commissions going in it. And I just started letting go of a lot of judgments. But coming to the Glacier View thing, I'm following from magazines and a few letters through the year, but intensely immersed. But every day we had kids bang on our gate. I was a school teacher for the missionary kids. Banging on our gate and someone would go out and there's a child beggar. And we didn't give money. They always had a big story. And it could have been true or it might not have been. We didn't know. But if we gave them food, some kids would take the food, thank us and walk off. And we got a sense that they were the ones taking the food home. But there were other kids that would look around like in terror, push up against the gate and just stuff the food in their mouth. And we knew they were the ones that were the kids that had been bought by professional beggars. That means that a family couldn't pay their bills and they forfeit their child. Or a child has been sold because of the poverty and they're sold and they're kept half-starved to get the money. Every time we went down the street, there's a beggar. I remember a beggar on like 4 little wheels. It wasn't a skateboard, but it's kind of a makeshift skateboard. And his legs are all twisted. And he skates along the cars with his bucksheesh. And he'd get it. But then when the traffic changed and took off, it's just taking off. And he's scooting around less than a metre off the ground, dodging around to the side of the road, waiting for the next one.
Wow.
I saw so much poverty. I saw people on the streets that if you looked in their eyes, it was like nobody home.
It makes fights over theology pale, doesn't it?
Yeah. I saw some of the happiest people who had so little, and I'll never glorify poverty. They had so much less than you and I. I was confronted by another major world religion, and I was fascinated. But I started looking at the patterns of thought, not the specific beliefs. And I saw a pattern like Adventism in many times. And I started looking at the patterns of religious belief, and then later I could expand it to political belief and belief in general. So I was seeing all of that. I was seeing social injustice. We had one time, there was a big curfew because an embassy not far from us, guys came along and just mowed down people with a machine gun. There was glass around the tall edges and barbed wire of our places. Every home had a security guard. I could go on and on and on about the poverty, the social injustice, the struggle. So many stories. So many stories. And I'm being confronted in good ways and in challenging and tough ways. And back in Australia, the church is just being shredded to bits with theological arguments. And I was following. I wrote to Des Ford and a letter for encouragement, and he sent me his Revelation books to read. That really touched me. Just back to when I was at college, I remember Des Ford came through in 1981. I think it was 81, maybe 83. And he came and the pastors were told that if they turned up to the meetings, they'd lose their job instantly.
It was 83 because I went along. You went to the meetings.
I remember Weber Roberts
they were out in
Toronto.
Or Toronto, yeah.
And Weber Roberts was there. I knew him from Longburn, and he was a pastor, and he told me, I've been told if I get found out that I'm here, my job is gone.
And there wasn't many people there from memory.
No. So
they'd all been warned off.
Yeah. So that year in Pakistan was profound. Every single day of my life, I cannot have conservative political ideas. I cannot have conservative anything ideas. My ear there broke. Like, I grew up with mission consciousness, foreign consciousness, but nothing like going to one of the poorest remote countries of the world and facing all of this. I also love books. I read so many books. I saw a book in a shop, Why I'm Not a Christian, by Bertrand Russell. And instead of being the kind, like Tony Campolo said, something about we met the enemy and they're partly right. Instead of the traditional Christian, they're against us, they're wrong, and we'll prove them wrong.
Yeah.
I have the thing as I want to understand and listen. And there were things that I gained a real insight into religion and Christianity from that. I also saw things in his that I thought, he's trying to do some logical thinking here, but there's some premises that are not quite working for me. I read Edward de Bono's book, The Happiness Purpose. If I was to invent a new religion, this would be it. And it could work with an existing religion or its own. And I loved that exploration with him. And then another one that really was wonderful was Rabbi Harold Kushner wrote a book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People.
Mm.
And he was a rabbi that had all the nice theological answers about suffering like we do as Adventists. And then his own 3 or 4-year-old son was diagnosed with the old age disease, where he's going to die at 10 or 11, a wrinkled, wizened up old man.
Mm.
And he said all the answers he had didn't work anymore. They didn't work anymore. And he explored Job, and he looked at God being all knowing, all powerful, and all whatever. And he said, you can do two of those, but the third one won't work. And he showed patterns. And so it challenged another one of my foundations. Profound thinking in that year. That leads me to coming back. That's where the next bombshell hits.
Tell us about it.
So I'd read, followed some of the things through Evangelica, through Spectrum, through probably those two. And I'd followed a little bit from a distance. But I stepped back into Australia and turned up to college.
What year was that?
1983.
Yeah.
And Gary Bagnall and Linley Bradford were going together at the time, and they were the ones that invited me to the Theo students weekend almost as soon as college started. They must have been Theo students and friends. You know, I got back to Australia and I was just rocked to discover what had happened. I got to Avondale to find that there were students and others that hunted out Bernie Brinsmead, caught him out on not believing in the remnant and some other things. And the most beautiful, deep thinker, deep soul, spiritual follower of Jesus, that people could have been so cruel and mean and nasty. There was other people that, and I came back to an Avondale that I didn't recognise. And if I asked a question that was an honest question, I remember a theology student that became a high up leader in the church pounce on me. You don't ask questions like that. Might not have been the exact way.
Right.
And it was an honest seeking to
So
understand.
in that time you're away, there's been a shift.
Sabbath lunches, be careful what you talk about.
Yeah.
Be careful what you talk about in class.
Yeah.
And I watched this massive, massive censorship, self-censorship. It was huge.
So what do you think had brought that about? Was that just momentum, Standish Brothers being a little bit more
I would say,
planned?
I'm guessing, I would say the biggest part of it is people losing their jobs, their livelihoods, their call,
Okay. Yeah.
their mission, and the church wars and the cruelty.
Yeah, okay.
And like, you think of it, when you're a pastor and that's all you know, if you work with computers, you can work with any company.
Mm.
When you're an Adventist pastor, you can't just say it didn't work here. Church of Christ, can you take me on?
Yeah, that's right.
It's a terrifying thing when that's all you know.
Mm.
And reading some of the stories on Facebook the other day.
Hearing John Hammond's,
John Hammond saying,
yeah,
no
John,
home, no job,
yeah,
a piece of a theology degree that the only time it's worth anything now is in the toilet paper crisis.
and ostracized as well. So people were very fearful of becoming the next target, the next person that would get hit.
And also, I just remember a friend as, I just raised some questions and the pouncing down, you're not supposed to think that way.
Mm.
And suddenly there was the no more thinking. There was, you're this or you're that.
Mm.
And the sense that Avondale was under threat, but also there were students I knew who were actually, I was told, were ringleaders, hunting out people. Students and people that I would have considered friends and still would. And it's all hearsay what they said, but these were the ringleaders that were out to do them in and catch them out and report them.
Yeah. I did notice a strong movement of young people siding with the Concerned Brethren. Just a quick aside, because it's an important story, and I'm not sure if you were there at the time. You might have been away in Pakistan, but I was at the Memorial Church one Sabbath school, I think around 82-ish, somewhere between 82, 83, and in came a bunch of young guys with balaclavas on and guns. and they
I,
raced down the front, stood on each side. Someone went up to the youth leader and pushed him and handcuffed him, and they said, right, Sunday laws have come in. All of you guys need to decide now, are you keeping the Sabbath or not? Those that are going to keep the Sabbath go this side of the room. And we were petrified.
Blair Andrews, I think, was the guy, and I think Jeff Parker might be one of the guys that helped.
Really?
And I heard about it, and it was a good old Adventist thing, and I invited them to come and do that down at college in the auto one Sabbath afternoon.
Well, I tell you what, there was a group of us just at the back corner that were, I don't know why, but some kind of default were about to kind of, we were talking, okay, if we jump over there, we'll grab that guy. So, because the girls were just screaming and freaking out. There was a lot of stuff, I won't say happened, that happened. And then they kind of took their balaclavas off and said, okay, this is what's going to happen one day.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
something tapped into the young people of that time where they wanted to support the very conservative the great controversy version of end time events.
Yeah. And look, it was happening a little bit while I was there before Pakistan, but I hear it went much bigger while I was away. But studying the Bible as literature was supposed to be just the most heathen thing to do. How dare you desecrate it and just treat it as literature?
Mm.
For me, I just flourished. For so many others, but there were people that was like, this is wrong. This is just taking human look at the Bible, and like, yet the more human the Bible becomes, the more interesting it is to me, rather than this sanitized thing. And so
You're the person that likes to push against these things. You'd been doing that previously. You come back from Pakistan with almost a new worldview, paradigm shift perspective, but you're still wanting to kind of help to do some things that create some thought.
well, I got to tell you,
Now you're not being. Now you're actually being and sort of finding tension when you do that.
look, when I think about it, it wasn't so much that that was my belief system. It was part of the Adventist culture, but it was also, here's something really dramatic. This is just something really dramatic to put on. And so I don't think that, I think it was more, we're in this Adventist milieu. I've heard about it. I haven't seen exactly what they do, but it's like, let's just get it on, get it there. And like, I was still in the Adventist bubble. Other than my year in Pakistan, where I lived on an Adventist compound with missionaries, I visited other Adventists on compound missionaries, and then we had a big church, nursing school, and hospital on an Adventist compound, and then we forayed from there. So I'm still in the bubble. Like, there's no way I'd put anything like that on again. But I was in the bubble, and it was something dramatic, and dramatic
Right.
I was interested in.
Yeah.
But I came back. I'm dealing with culture shock coming back. But even bigger, I walked into an Avondale where the fabric was shredded, and it wasn't the safe place for discovery and for talking. There was a rift. I found out. I hadn't been aware of all of the who's who and what's what that Harry Ballas talks about. I learned a lot from Harry the other day, but when I came back, I heard a lot and started to find out what had happened. And, you know, that year, you know, Webber Roberts, you know, he's going to lose his job. And I got up in front of the Theo students. They asked me to tell a bit of a story and what it's like to be back. And I just broke down and cried. And part of it was what I've come back into. And, you know, I was asked to do the Friday night at a homecoming for the, I think it was the 83 years. I graduated in 85. It might have been the 84 grad or 83. And I got up. I had this jacket on too, had my hippie tie-dyed shirt, fluoro clothes, all different. And part of my reflecting was to share that I rarely hear in public, even at Avondale. But I opened up about the suffering, the pain, the remembering that coming back and the brokenness and the difference, and pay tribute to those times and the people that suffered in all of that. And it's important that we're honest about those, because often they're just glossed over and that's just a thing in the past. So many people came and talked afterwards to actually hear it acknowledged, and not just a passing judgment on it or anything, but the human dimensions of it. You know, I came back, and within weeks, probably about 6 weeks, I questioned that I was an Adventist anymore. I didn't know how I could call myself an Adventist anymore. I still have a letter that I sent to a friend who I'd made at college the year before and had written a few times, many times through the year. Wasn't at college anymore, and I wrote a letter and I said, I just don't know where I fit in the church anymore. The Spirit of Jesus is gone. It's devastating.
When was that you felt that?
It's 83 when I came back.
Right.
And I really felt it. Like, you know, I grew up loving Jesus and all of that. The gospel was another liberating under those teachers at Avondale, of just the freshness and really seeing clarity. And then to come back and to just wonder, where's the Spirit of Jesus in all of this? The cruelty that has been done. I started hearing some of the things that Harry shared, and I was just broken. I was just broken, and I had to shut down and not talk about things. And healthy faith development means we talk our questions, our doubts, our beliefs, our joys. But now it was like, don't talk about those things. And
that came from both sides, didn't it? It wasn't just Conservatives saying don't talk about it. The Liberals were saying be careful not to talk about it or you won't get a job, that kind of thing as well.
And that didn't come to me until my graduating time.
Right.
That was there. And I was just thinking, how am I ever going to tell my parents that I'm not an Adventist anymore? How do I tell them?
Wow. I'm not laughing because it's funny. It's just like laugh or cry.
Yeah. And, you know, I remember my grandma would just tell me, when I'd visit her from New Zealand, she'd tell me, all of my children and all my grandkids all go to church every day. They're all faithful, loyal Seventh-day Adventists, and I'm going to see them all in heaven. Has not one of them left and lost. And I knew at least 2 that didn't go to church anymore. And I thought Grandma would just be brokenhearted. My mum would be brokenhearted. Like, how on earth could I tell them? But, you know, then it moved from there into, I'm just not even sure I'm a Christian anymore. And it went from the just brokenness around Adventism and I wrote to my friend, I said, I've decided to stay in the church because Adventism is so closed, they're not going to listen to anyone from outside. And I'm a missionary, and I've got the missionary spirit. I've come back from Pakistan. I'm going to be a missionary within the Adventist church to help them find Jesus and the Spirit of Jesus. I got tears. I would have seen it with individuals, but when I heard what leaders did, when I heard what some church people and what some churches did, and the cruelty, the harshness, the judgment of those who didn't believe in Des and those paths, well, they deserved it. They just deserved to get kicked out. And the coldness of that, it just broke me. And I said, I'm going, and somewhere I've copied it out. It was like, I copied that part of the letter. It's on a coloured piece of paper somewhere. I have to stay. I have to stay because they need to find Jesus. And when I read the book Angry Saints, it's like, that comes out of that times of the pain and suffering with the angry Adventists. And the gift to me was Bailey Gillespie from La Sierra came and did a week of prayer. And I spent hour on hour on hour. The first person in my life that I could be totally 100% honest about everything and not have someone try and change me, tell me wrong. Not even necessarily tell me I'm right, but just listen. And he just said how refreshing it was to have such honesty and realness. And for that week, we went for a journey. And look, I saw him a handful of times through life, but every time was like best friend, very, very special. And he was really big on faith development, on being open and honest and real. And that was where the break in allegiance to any denomination or religion came in that time. And I would flow into my fervent evangelical state. I never flowed back into the old one because it was toxic and it didn't work for me. I kind of drifted into charismatic type things, but never, that was more when I was working for the church. So I'm an experimenter. I wanted to go and have them lay hands and slay in the spirit and maybe speak in tongues. I didn't see it as the devil, but I had it when I was a church teacher. My place of giving was in the Adventist church. It was pretty dry. I didn't get fed much. It was my giving and ministries and joy and flourishing and all of that. But Sunday nights I went to the Gospel Christian Centre. It was a low-key charismatic place. And it was like, oh, a place where there's life and energy and
love.
Something that was enriching. But something got shut down where I didn't trust people anymore. I had to be careful who I shared things with. Because people can be really friendly, but if you hit the hot button, all of a sudden there's the bounce. And knowing what's happened to people. And church leaders, like, I always had a fondness and looking up to church leaders. I was taught to do that. And then I hear some people that their names were noble in my mind. And then I hear actions that are so against ethics and I'm never sure anymore and having to tiptoe. And it was a place of tiptoe through the church. When it came to graduation, it was still hot, even in, well, I'm trying to think, people talking about even teachers getting called in, primary teachers in interviews and being asked, do you believe in 1844? And if they said no, it was like, well, sorry, there's no job in the church for you.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I wonder what they're going to ask me when I do my interview. And are they going to ask me some specific questions where I have questions or I'm really not there? What are they going to do? Am I going to be authentic and lose the chance? I only knew the Adventist bubble. I always wanted to be an Adventist school teacher and principal. Do I lie to get that? Or do I tell the truth and not know how to survive? No. But being authentic was really big for me, but it was, I wonder what they're going to ask me.
When do you think what age or what year are we talking about that you suddenly had an inkling that nothing happened in 1844, maybe, if that ever happened?
As soon as I read Des's manuscript, probably when I heard the tape. And it wasn't a sudden nothing happened. I think there's, like I hear Lloyd say it doesn't really matter what date in 1844. And that was interesting because the exact date was so important. And yet there are questions about which one. And there are questions about how things go. And there's questions about when it begins. And, the Adventist certainty about mathematical precision. I love that. I had a math science personality at one stage and I moved into something that was more arty and now into other things, including that. Like that was all part of the certainty of our faith. But I think one of the things with Norm in New Testament, we must have been doing Revelation and he talked about the metaphor and symbolism and we got into that. That made sense in all the literal. And Norm said the dimensions in Revelation are that the New Jerusalem is a cube. So many 100 kilometres long, wide and high. And I'm imagining like that, it's going to be dark inside or everything you like. Well, you got whatever, if you're going to go literal, the light of God and everything. But it's just like Norm said, let's look at the numbers. Let's look at the symbolism. The most holy place was a cube. And it's like the presence of God, as we're entering the presence of God. And I'm like, now this is making sense instead of the literalistic. This is where a lot of the literalism went, that I didn't need a specific date and I didn't need all the things working the exact dates and all of that. It was no longer my faith is shattered if they found a different date or that it wasn't a big thing. That doesn't shatter my faith.
Were you called in and asked the question? Like,
I got in.
because you and I graduated at 85.
Well, I had Lyle Davis and Bill Irvine and someone else who I can't remember. Lyle was Dad's roommate at a time at Avondale. Bill Irvine and his family came on the cruise ship to New Zealand passenger ship, when it was cheaper to passenger ship than to fly, when we moved over, and they were there for a while, so we had affiliations with them. And then Lyle came over and was principal and my teacher. And Lyle asked me, how's your dad enjoying his job over at Carmel? And I thought, you're the one that employs him as the union education director. It was just small talk.
Right.
And, oh, how's your dad? How's your mum going? You know, they just chatted about my family.
Yeah.
And I knew this is part of the old boys club and network, because there were ones that were called in and hammered on the theology.
Yeah, yeah.
And for me, it was like, oh, welcome.
Yeah.
Where would you like to teach? What grades would you like? And I'll pretty much go anywhere, but you know.
In some ways, you and I,
grades would be great.
in some ways, you and I were kind of on the edges of being on the inside, and if we'd chosen to run with it, I remember in the late 80s, I don't think I've said this before, I almost came back from New Zealand where I was teaching to do theology. There was a guy in Auckland who was quite a big influence on me with that kind of thing. Oh, I forgot. But I almost came back, and I think if you and I had done theology, we would have been quite embraced within the network.
Well, I remember Wayne Krause telling somebody, or even telling me maybe, like, you really should go and do theology, because I got picked up as a youth director because of my performing arts and clowning and all of that.
I want to come to that in a minute too.
And I remember Wayne just saying, you really need to do theology because then you'll have a certainty of the job. But, you know, there's people like Eric White, and I think maybe Malcolm Allen, some of the others were primary teachers or something, or came through different ways. I might have my names wrong, but they came through not doing theology. But I did really well in my youth ministry. And I always knew that the world opened up. I spoke in many, many parts of the world. I knew the possibilities were there for me. But it was like, we need to come to this when we hit those years. Because I knew where I could go in the church if I could pretend, but I couldn't.
Yeah, exactly. That was the same with me. I knew that I'd have to speak my truth, and I wouldn't be accepted in there.
So Bronnie graduated with me. I think it was that year.
Yeah.
And she loves to joke, because when they asked her about, do you believe fundamental about 1844, and she said, look, I'm okay with that one, but I can't remember the number. Number 13, I've got some questions. Well, exactly what is it? You know, what's number 13? She said, I thought you'd know what number 13 is. She loves to joke about that one, whether it's an urban myth or not. I don't know.
I love, I was in class with Bronwyn, you might have been there too once, and she asked Dr. Lindsay, and I think Bronwyn might be watching, so tell me if I'm wrong, Bronwyn, but she asked Dr. Lindsay in her lecture room, would there be another time where another prophet would rise up within Adventism? And I just remember thinking, wow, if there ever was going to be one, it'd be Bronwyn.
Now, the other thing that happened all around that time was where they started finding out all about the Ellen White things. There was the 1919 Bible Conference, then Walter Ray, and James Cox, Jim Cox's colleague. Or was it Jim, or was it his colleague, did the research on Desire of Ages and Ellen White and found massive borrowings and different things. And a whole lot of stuff came that we'd been taught that...
Davenport kind of...
I can remember my primary school teacher at prayer meeting one night read a passage from Ellen White and said, this just is proof. of her
Yeah.
divinity that
Yeah.
an uneducated woman could write with such eloquence.
Mm,
And, you know, the myth that was built up, and then when people find out, they're just shattered and shattered. It didn't shatter me.
It shattered me for some reason. I, when I thought, oh, so it was probably Fanny Bolton or Marion Davis that wrote that, or she copied it. I still respected her,
Yeah.
but I did feel shattered because I'd been told exactly that story. Wow, you're uneducated, and they're beautiful words. You read the way that they're written is incredible. Um, but people say, oh, copyright was different back then. But what about the Connie Bear Howson who they threatened legal action against her for one of her books on Paul, and so she took it off the shelf
Sketches
because
of the Life of Paul, and
yes.
I bought it as soon as I'd heard about it, that it's controversial and you couldn't get it, and then somebody published it, and it's in my bookshelf.
Oh, yeah.
Because that was
In
like
fact,
the
that's good that you've got it because you've got the Connie Bear Howson book, or
Sorry,
her book?
no, Sketches of the Life of Paul.
You've got her book.
Yeah.
See, that's great because a lot of people, you make sure you don't lose that because a lot of people have said, oh, no, that's not true. That's just an urban myth. And I'm going, no.
And even when I
They
started,
were going to take her to court, so she took it off the shelves, or they stopped the publishing going ahead.
I think Avondale blew proof texting out of the water for me, because that's how we learned the Bible.
Yeah.
Proof texting, a bit here, a bit there, or linking.
Well, then they said, oh, well, the Bible writers copied as well. And I'm thinking, don't tell me that. You've already shattered one thing.
When I was at high school, for our Bible class in Form 6, we had Lowell Davis, and we would read, we had a Bible thing that had question 1 in bold, and then underneath it had the reference for the Bible, and then it had an Ellen White quote or two. We had to look up the Bible reference, but we had the quotes there. And I remember one of them was about against jewelry. And I read the text, and it said, God said in Isaiah or Jeremiah, I'm going to take your necklaces and your bracelets and your earrings or whatever. I'm going to take them away from you. And that was the text that says they're bad. I was silly enough to read the whole context. If you turn away from me and don't turn back to me, I'm going to take away your husbands, your wives, your kids, your sheep, your goats, your land, your necklaces, your jewelry, your clothes. Okay, so let's get rid of our clothes. Let's get rid of our relationships. Let's get rid of everything because they're all evil. I was angry. I was really angry that they lied to me. Another one was we had a memory verse. You search the scriptures because in them you think you have eternal life. Or no, search the scriptures. And it didn't, I looked at my Bible and it said, you search the scriptures. Jesus was saying, you go and look in the scriptures to find eternal life. But that's not where it is. They testify of me. And it was a text to tell us we should read the Bible. Reading the Bible's fine, but they were lying using it. Those were two things that started breaking that thing of just believing what I was told in the proof texting. But then, the way that it's used, the remnant keeps the commandments of God and have the spirit of, the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Is that right, what it is?
Yeah.
And I just thought, the spirit of all prophecy is telling about Jesus. That's what it means. And they build this whole big thing around one person. The way they made it specifically that it's just Advent. Remnant simply means what's left when everything else is gone.
Yeah.
When you cut out a dress and sew it up, what's left? The bits left, that's the remnant. What's left when you eat a meal and you haven't eaten it all? What's left is the remnant.
Yeah.
You only know what the remnant is when you get there. And I just started doing some common sense reading things, and I'm like, they're just constructing these huge big things out of pulling things that other people wouldn't even see.
Ultimately, they're just trying to explain it and justify the great disappointment. They couldn't cope with it, so they had to kind of make it all fit together and use scripture and visions to support it.
And I followed the whole thing around the shut door theory, and like there were all these explanations, and that kept the bar kept shifting. First of all, Jesus is coming, he doesn't come, then it's we've got 7 months or whatever it is, and then that doesn't happen, and then it's only those can be saved, and then it's like the door opens some more, and all the contortions that I've read through the years to try and say it really is true.
Yeah.
And like, Okay, jumping way out of that, years later, I read a book by John Shelby Spong, The Sins of the Scriptures.
Mm.
That was a liberating one for me.
But you
Just
took a group of us along
exactly,
to see him speak too.
yeah. He just said, let's just admit there's some things in here in the Bible that are unethical. The Bible helps us inform some good values, and there's things in here we've just got to say we don't have to contort. This is where I find more liberals and the conservatives tend to be quite literalistic. So even, for example, around the LBGT text, there'll be one lot reads it one way and it's... But then there's the others that are saying it doesn't really say this and like it really says in the Greek and the Hebrew this
Yeah,
and that.
yeah.
And I'm like...
I agree.
I've heard some really good expositions around it that show that, you know, when you look at the culture and everything else, there's one that could go either way and the others, you know, are totally different. But, the energy that goes on taking every word as if it's literal.
Yeah.
And
They did say it. That's how they did think. That was then. This is now. They were wrong.
And so I see these patterns of thinking that it's just people are coming from more heartfelt views versus more let's keep the status quo views. And I'm just like, let's let go of that literalness with it all. And like with Ellen White, just the more human... See, my parents were caretakers for Sunnyside for 13 years.
That's right, yeah.
And Mum and Dad just loved reading and learning. They're down-to-earth people. They read books and just shared stories. And, you know, one of the most beautiful stories was out at Freeman's Waterhole. There was probably a logging camp or something, or a camp. There were people living there that were very poor. And turns out they were coming and robbing the orchard and the gardens at night.
Oh, right.
And they found out who was taking it. So Ellen got a buggy, got some of a group, got food from the orchard and the gardens, got the nurse, and just went out and paid a visit to the neighbours down the road. Long road away for those days. And just came along and said, hey, we live up the road. And we've got a nurse, wondered if there's anything we could do to just check you out. And we've got some food, and if you ever need some food, come and see us. We've got plenty of food to share. Oh, that humanness, that says more to me than the people that have put her in a box and make her an idol, the whiteology. Other ones, like her humanness, that I've read the thing where James White just said it's impossible with you. How can I argue with you when you're speaking for God all the time? I can't have my own opinion. You're right all the time. And they're actually separated for a time.
Yeah.
It's like I can feel the agony and all, but all that humanness of they're real humans on a messy and beautiful journey. Like the way that she had a health message and was still eating oysters or pork or whatever it was. It's like, I don't need somebody to be perfectionistic. I grew up where you had to be perfect and it kills us.
Yeah.
We all have our hidden things and our things where we say one thing and don't walk it. Like,
and our flaws.
Hear all that. I don't have to try and justify it and say it's not true. It's like, I just think of a woman in those times that's standing up against the patriarchy and the men. Oh my goodness, she had to be a bit of a control freak to hold all that together. And then when you hear, you know, it was like noble Ellen White decided to be the missionary of Australia, and then we find out that she was banished.
Yeah.
She was a thorn in the side of the GC and they sent her out.
Yeah.
Just the more I see the humanness in the Bible, the more I can see divinity, whatever that means, shine. The more I see the humanness in Ellen White and our pioneers, the more I can actually see the beautiful transcendent things. But the more we have to try and say we're 100% right all the time and nothing can ever change. Oh, that is painful. That is exhausting. And like, new light will unfold, but there'll be nothing to contradict anything before. It's like, can't we just let go?
This is why I've always said I think there's two churches in one, because there's people that are like you. We just want to move on. We're talking about it not because we want to regurgitate it, but we just want to move on. We want to highlight how stupid it is so we can actually just move on, hang out together, speak all our different truths and share our ideas. But the other side is very committed to not having that side in its ranks. And so it just creates this tension. Can I just ask a question that Shelley Poole has written? Only because it's a little bit, it relates to that, and I think she might have even written it twice to make sure we did see it. And it's a good one. I'll answer first because I just read it, and you have a think while I'm answering it. Question for both Graham and Peter. Through the lens of hindsight, what's one thing you wish you understood about Glacier View then that you understand now? And for me, there is nothing different. My understanding now and then is the same of the event. I've learnt in the last few weeks some things I didn't know. I didn't realise the 10-point document had such a big impact. There's lots of little things I've learnt as far as details go, but my hindsight lens, if I could go back and tell the me of then to the me, oh, the me now could go and tell the me then, would be to shift the attitude that it was going to change. Back then, I thought, okay, this is a glitch, this is terrible, we're going to get over it. We kept being told it's going to change, it's going to be okay, and I believed that. So in hindsight, my realization that I wish I understood then is I kept thinking it was going to change. And I kept thinking that right up till I was 55, and now I don't think it is going to change.
Mm,
Now, I don't mean to be pessimistic, and I've said it a few times on other interviews, but to answer that question, that's the difference for me.
mm,
I thought then it would change, now I think it's not going to change. And people will say, oh, but it is changing. Our church is great. We don't even think about that. We don't raise these topics. We don't talk about those things. Well, you wait. It's going to come back around again. It will impact you. It'll impact your children, and it's not going to change.
mm.
What's your answer to that question?
A couple of years ago at the free lunch pulse that built community at Avondale College and I helped run, David Tasker, one Old Testament scholar, said to me, in Adventist history, every generation, around approximately every 40 years, there's a massive conflict and a lot of pain and a blow up.
Mm,
And he said, we're due one. And I wonder, are we going to have one? And if so, what will it be?
100%.
And I've just been watching over the last few years the intense control. Devastated. When somebody said, was it Iris said the church moved away from me?
Yes.
This is not, I used to think, yeah, there's some of the leaders are controlling, just like some parents are controlling, and that's just how it is, and it's in their imperfection. But in the last few years, watching the institutionalization of control
Yeah.
and conformity with shame and punishment
Yeah.
and threats,
Yeah.
and narrowing of things, and you do this or that, and even to a meeting for the ordination of women in Pacific Union Mission conference, where it was the president got up and he threatened the president. He threatened them all.
Yeah.
I'm telling you how you should do it, and if you don't, you're going to be punished. That was the
Yeah.
message that came. And I'm just like,
And then to say, oh, but you voted it in.
I know we had control and we had a narrow picture of what it was to be Adventist and all of that. But what I'm watching is I see so many really, really loyal Adventist folk, people that are the heart and soul of their churches, that have been gospel people. They might not have seen eye to eye with some of the mainstream, but they haven't bailed. They've been there through thick and thin, doing everything, being involved. And they'd even stand up for conferences and unions and everything. It's like they back that kind of thing, knowing the humanity. And I've been watching over decades, and especially in the last half decade, they might be still involved, but it's their local congregation, but the church has left them.
Yeah.
The global church and the leadership up high has left them.
And what about that lady, like younger people might say, but it's not affecting us now. Let's move on. What about the lady isn't she a conference president in California, and she wasn't even put in the yearbook? Her picture wasn't put in the yearbook on purpose.
So Sandra Roberts.
Those things
was,
are
I
going to
think
impact
she
young
was the
people.
secretary of the conference for many years. Very, very loved woman.
Yeah.
She was voted in, and in their directory, they have a listing of every personnel in the conference, but where it has president, there is no name. And when she's eligible to go, would be eligible to go to meetings, she'll be an observer, but she won't be there. She won't be on the minutes. She doesn't exist.
And there will be a trickle down. It will affect local church soon. And can I just add to my
I haven't answered my question yet.
I'll just add to mine because I'll forget, you won't. That doesn't mean, because I think it won't change, that there aren't amazing people. In fact, doing this series on Glacier View, I've reconnected with people that are atheists now, people that are have left the church, people that are angry, people that are healing, people that are bitter, people that think we should be not talking about it, and have had meaningful engagements with every single one of them. So it's not that those engagements end.
This is what's important, is that we can connect heart to heart deeply as humans.
Exactly. Yeah.
Without putting up barriers and walls and fights.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's what's ripping our world to bits.
Yeah.
Why do we want to do that in the church?
I feel like the people that are in this group, I'm feeling a beautiful connection with, and we're just speaking openly, and we disagree, but there's a really beautiful connection. Now, back to your answer. I'm sorry to interrupt.
The question, Shelley's question, is, knowing what I know now, how would I see Glacier View?
Yeah, through the lens of hindsight, what's one thing you wish you understood about, one thing you understood about Glacier View then that you understand now? You wish you knew then. What's one thing you wish you knew then that you do know now?
What I know now is, through many levels of suffering in many parts of my life, and having been on a massive healing journey and an ongoing healing journey, and then professional training, I wish I was aware of how much hurt. I got a sense, but I wish I knew, and I wish I knew more about how to be there with people in their pain and healing. And I think maybe my missionary thing would have been, like, I love what I did in the youth work, but would have been, how can I be there? I can't fix it for everyone, but how can I be there to really help people heal? Because when I heard John Godfrey say his golf game was messed up, he had nightmares, it's opened up too much. I contacted him in private. I've seen things since that for some people they say it's healing. For him, it's just opened up what he thought had put to bed.
Yeah.
My heart breaks.
Yeah.
I hear what John Hammond went through, Gordon Hammond. I hear...
Oh, I said John before, didn't I? I meant Gordon. Yeah.
Yeah, and like, David Thiel has put up about the hurt and pain and anger, and he was just before the SDAQ generation. Look, scratching under the surface, there is so much pain. And when people say just let it be, it's all past, it's all gone, no. From all of I've been in with hundreds and hundreds of people in deep healing groups, and listening to the traumas that go, sharing the things that have not been spoken, that are eating away, not to drag up the past, but simply what's boiling under there that's a festering wound.
Yeah.
And how that affects people's lives and relationships. Oh, like, I wish I knew now what I knew then. To be an agent for healing. When I came back, and the pain that I saw, and I didn't realise how big it was, that has affected me forever. With the feeling for people, with the empathy, with the not being able to trust. In youth ministry, we were doing such big things that we had 300 turning up at Yarrahapini.
I want to come to that in a minute. I just want to introduce.
Let's say one thing that relates to this healing.
Yeah.
The mainstream people at the conference, like, why are you having lots of people coming to your events and hardly anyone comes to ours? we have meetings for 2 or 4 or 6 people for a whole weekend, and you're telling people not to come because you're too full. And I gave them some ideas, and they said, well, let us invite everyone in. And I said, you can't fit them in. And sometimes there are things that young people need to be away to do their freedom stuff. And they said, see, youth and adults can't work together. And I said, no. There's some practical things here, but let me work with you and let's create something for all generations. And for me, we created something that was most beautiful week that went from conventional outreach through to all kinds of creative and heart things. And people just said, oh, it's so lovely to have a taste of the non-traditional side of Adventism. And to me, that's what we created and I lived in youth. But I got someone from Lifeline to come, not to train people to be counsellors, but to actually train people counselling skills that can make us better humans for relating. And she came to me and she said, I'm blown away by the love in this community. This is a remarkable community, the love and connection in Adventism. Like you have something special. And then she said, what deeply troubles me and shocks me, how hurting and how lonely there is, loneliness, if you scratch under the surface.
Yeah.
And I'm devastated, but I wasn't surprised. I said, I'm not surprised. That's what we live in. It's like we don't open up and speak. We don't share. There's the fear of being pounced on, ripped to shreds, not good enough, not perfect enough, all kinds of things. I wish I knew how to be a better healer back then.
Yeah, it's a beautiful answer, Graeme. Just one last thing I want to Shelley has just said GC is different to SPD and AUC though. I think it's important to note that the GC, the SPD is the GC represented here, and the AUC is looking after the cultural day-to-day runnings of the Australian kind of Adventist conferences.
From my travelling around the world, we're a different Adventism.
Yeah.
And when you talk about 2 churches in one, I actually think in terms of Adventisms. Like I looked at the statistics of the world.
Being very general when I say 2.
And we, if we were a nation, for baptized members, we would be somewhere in the 50s as a nation of population in the world. If we include the kids, the unbaptized people, the teenagers, all of that, we're up in I think it's in the 30s as a nation. Can you imagine in one geographical location trying to tell everyone exactly what they should believe, how they should behave, that they've got to follow all of the rules that the hierarchy makes, and you've got to do this and that, and if you're not, you're in big trouble. It's impossible unless you become an entirely totalitarian state. Now, add to that the geographies across the world, that we've got Adventists in just about every different country, every different culture, every different style of thinking across all of that. It's like, of course we're going to have Adventisms.
Yeah.
And the more we try and narrow it, the more we're going to have conflict and breakaway, because if you can't tolerate the diversity, like creation has so much diversity. How many different species of dogs are there, breeds of dogs? Like, come on, we want to make everyone in a little narrow box.
Exactly. And I certainly want to say, let's make 2 Adventists. I guess I'm saying there's one umbrella, and the people under that umbrella want it to be very defined, and they want people to comply to a certain view. The other umbrella has many different Adventists and different.
And I'd say that there's also...
They're open to that as well.
I've noticed, I'd even put 3 general... There's many ways to divide 3 general categories. There's the one that is at all costs to keep the old way. There's those people. And there's certainty, and there's a faith and a certainty that means a lot to them in there. Then there's the others that we get labelled as liberals or progressives. But, you know, right in the middle, you go out into the country, you would find this when you go out doing your singing around the place. There's a whole lot of people that are just good salt of the earth people. They don't think day in and day out, like you and I might sometimes, about this bit of theology and that bit of theology. They've accepted a package of faith that works for them. They don't live their life obsessing all about it. They love coming to their church, their community, being involved. There's the rituals, the potlucks, and all the different things they do. And it's something really special for their life. And
if they sense a trickle down from the GC, which will affect the SPD, which will affect the unions, which will affect the conference, which will affect the grassroots church, and a young person comes up going, hey, can I think outside the box? No matter if they're wonderful day-to-day soul to the earth people, they will suppress that person because of the trickle down effect.
Because one of the things that, what happens at the top, there's a lag of what's going to happen. I don't find, and I'm talking about in my sphere in Australia, I don't find, when I was a kid, we knew about the General Conference. We looked up to the General Conference man, always a man that came through. We knew the layers of church and how it all worked. Back then, the division was told to us that it was underneath the GC. Now we know it's actually part of it. But it was all sorted out. Do you know, the longer I've been around, for a young person, if you talk conference, church means what happens in my church. And if they are having a meaningful time, they're getting fed, they've got some service to do, there's some beautiful social connections, that's church for them.
Mm.
They're not thinking about, am I going to attend this church in another city and in 40 years' time, will I still be wherever I am going? I don't think for many, there's a big thing like that.
Mm.
I think it's right now, right here. And if they're not getting it, they find another one or they're gone.
Yeah.
The conference simply means big camp, summer camps. That's really the conference.
Mm.
There might be someone that they enjoy, but any one personnel can't get around our conference and preach a different church every Sabbath. It's every few years they'll get to someone, almost never to others. So conference doesn't, we've moved away in our consciousness from a hierarchical world and model.
Mm.
And so we've lost respect for politicians in our country. America's a prime example of both sides. They've lost respect. I don't think there's a great, at least in our culture here, I don't think there's a great thing as, the GC said you should do this, so we shouldn't. We should. When I was in youth ministry, I went to a GC youth department, youth evangelism conference in Prague. And they were coming up with, this is going to be the big new directions. The youth directors were saying, from Aussie, what did we come for? Like, we're way ahead of all of this. And I'm like, you're a global thing. You can't, did you really expect something that's going to be on the cutting edge here? The youth department put out the history of the General Conference Youth Department film, and they wanted us all to buy it and show it to all of our youth. South Americans weren't going to boycott it because the actors all had lipstick on. The Aussies is like, who wants to even look at this? What's the point? And I just saw all these different reactions. It was like, it's nice that you spent all that time and you had a little bit of fun with it, but does anybody care? And I think that if the whole dobbing mechanism that is wanted starts reaching down lower and lower, there's going to be all kinds of resistance.
There's going to be resistance.
And I'll tell you,
I'm not saying there won't be. I'm just saying people don't think it's coming.
This is moving off the topic, but I think my going to Pakistan gave me global perspectives on things. And I've been in something like volunteered or travelled to volunteer. Travelling and volunteering my travelling has been with volunteering, and it's been something like 50 plus countries, from Western to Syria to Pakistan to Africa to every continent except the Antarctica. And I've been in all of these, and most of it has been related to the Adventist Church or some connection there. And it's so different in so many places. And there are cultures that really look up at the GC thing. There were ones that said, GC, you tell us what to do and we will do it. You're the chiefs. And the Aussies were really different.
I
So
think though, before, sorry to interrupt, but before the Autumn Council, people were saying to me, because I said, "Oh, you wait. There's going to be some warnings and reprimands, and then there'll be sanctions down the track." And people were saying, "No, no, no. Look at the Danish guys and the Norwegian guys. There's no way those guys are going to let that kind of thing happen." And then it did happen. I'm just worried that we think the SPD guys are going to stand the ground, and the union guys are going to stand the ground. But let's just wait till they start saying we do support women's ordination, we do support certain
okay,
gay right situations.
we've jumped into another topic, but this really fits in with the whole change thing. Are we going to sit back and wait, or are we going to fight, or whatever? I watched the movie Suffragettes, and it broke my heart
Yeah.
at the women in England that fought and died and suffered. And there were politicians, male politicians, that said, just wait, just wait. It's coming. We'll get there. And the women were like, yes. And you keep saying it and you keep saying it, you keep saying it. And it's like it's not happening.
Mm.
And the cost that was there. But just on the women's ordination one, like anyone that knows anything about Adventism, not part of it, and knows that we don't ordain women, they're flabbergasted. You mean you had Ellen White and you're still fighting this?
Mm.
They're bamboozled. I've taught at university in social justice, and I've worked in social ecology and with deeply ethical people that are doing social change, caring for the environment, that leave most of what Adventists do for dead. Profoundly deep, beautiful people. Do you think I would ever tell them that I have anything to do with the church that refuses to ordain women? That equality thing for them is so old hat that anyone's fighting it. And they know there's parts of society now would fight that sort of thing. But they would question my ethics that I want to be, except that my reason for being around, I love people. There's really beautiful things about Adventist culture and young people. And I really love opening hearts, connecting people, helping to grow people, not tell them how to do their spirituality, but to help them go on a beautiful, meaningful journey. I can explain that, but it's just for ethical people. And to try and tell them all about all kinds of little ins and outs and the way that people get so cruelly treated, and that we have leadership that are shaming, punishing, threatening. Like, seriously, anyone that has ethics that I know that's not part of the church that's invested in it would be just like, I wouldn't want to have anything to do with that. How could anyone want to walk into that kind of thing?
I want to just talk about your time, because we're running out of time, but your time in the North New South Wales Conference as the creative director, because I think it's a really important thing to note the positive impact you had. And I don't even think you're totally aware of that. Glenn Roberts created this space that was safe, and then you came in. Wayne French continued on with that safe space and fought hard for you and others of us that were being creative and wanting to create a safe message to the young kids. And that was carried on again by Jeff Parker. It was heralded in by a lot of amazing people like Rick Foray and other youth people that were concerned and interested in youth in the late 80s. But in the early 90s, you came along at the perfect time when you had support from Glenn and Wayne and Jeff, and I've lost a little bit of touch now who's involved now. But you did some stuff there that has forever changed people's lives and has meant that they haven't had the nightmares about probation. Has meant that they have lived a life free of a lot of the politics and have really connected with Christ in that way that you were talking about before.
Yeah.
I just wanted to highlight that because I think your impact on this conference was profound, And I know a lot of people that are watching will agree. And I think it's important that people that aren't officially ordained ministers often don't get the thanks they deserve. So, on behalf of all the people I know that have spoken highly of you over the years, thank you. You have shaped, changed, and brought a beautiful teaching and modality and focus on love that many of us would not have experienced if it wasn't for you. So, thank you for that.
Thank you. Can I just share some thoughts that come from that, like deep gratitude? There's many reasons why people are different, and there's personalities, culture, history. But you know, in teaching creativity, we looked at Kolb's learning style, and there's lots of aspects to it. But one of them is the convergent thinkers and the divergent thinkers. And there are people that want to come to everything to a peak, to a certainty. The artists are the divergent thinkers. And there's other people in that too. That we flourish in the colour, not the black and white. We can hold paradox and complexity. We want to see, here's one way to look, and here's this way, and here's that way. And like Iris just touched it so beautifully. I get her soul. Is in the metaphors and the stories and the mystery and the art and the poetry and everything else. We can hold this metaphor, but it's not this is the right way to see it. It's like, oh, the juiciness of this, and I can get that out of it. And then this one, oh, I can get a richness. To bring the arts and the artistic and the diversity, that's part of my soul that didn't fit with the black and white, you've got to fit in the boxes thing. And then the way that, it's a huge other story, but Glenn Roberts and Ian McKean were both in ministry around that time, and both of them said to me, we're the last of those that did theology when we were at college. We're the last that are left. The rest were all cleaned out and gone.
And Ian went too.
Yeah, and so neither of them are in formal ministry, but they're always pastors. This is what I've noticed. Every single pastor that I've met that has left for whatever reason, and some of them under theological clouds, some from personal stuff, how many of them I watch them, and no matter what role they're in, they're a pastoral heart. That goes deeper than their theology. And Glenn did not like being up front, but he said, I've got a thicker skin. I want to put a wall around young people to protect them. I want to put a wall around creative people to protect them, and people can hammer me, but they're not going to touch them. And he did that with me. He did that with so many of us, and created a space for authenticity, for realness, for experimentation, for spirituality, for creativity. And we kind of had our own little 60s, 70s type thing in North New South Wales Conference, based around what we did at Yarrahapinni. There were other places too, but there was a very, very special thing that we did.
Yeah.
And, the church didn't talk about grace much until more recent years. I remember being at camp meeting in the 90s, and I'd go and listen to people, different ones, George Knight and others, and I'd say, they're talking the stuff that Des used to talk, and he'd get hammered for, and pastors got hammered for and lost their jobs. And now times have moved, and part of me celebrated things change, and part of me was really angry because there was no, we're not like him. Like, no, he was bad, but no, can't we just admit that we were wrong, that we hurt people, that people are saying now what was said before?
Yeah. It has to be an admission instead of a very clever rewording of the fundamentals that make you go, oh, okay, I think that's just lovely.
I just got to run through another thing that I think is really important understanding this, is there are people who are born and growing up in the church, and then those who baptized into it through a doctrinal thing, and there's a crossing over. I remember seeing the most beautiful thing in Religious Liberty magazine, and Clifford Goldstein wrote the most beautiful article about for In Society for Religious Freedom and Liberty. And I wrote to him and I said, that just touches me and it's so beautiful. And I only wish that's how we could live within Adventism. And he wrote back and said, once you're in Adventism, you sign up for this, that, and the other, and you've got to fit in that. There is no room for that freedom, that liberty within. And I just thought, that's a perspective that narrows and pushes people out, that it's got to be a certain way. And I've lived with that for so long, with people say, if you don't fit the narrow thing. But, when we look sociologically at a community, if we're a nation, if I was born in Italy, I'm always Italian, even if I've lived somewhere else. Like, I don't see you as having left the church. I see you as having taken your name off the books officially. But you are part of the diaspora of Adventism and the community in Adventism, and you play a special role. But we have a duty as a church community to nurture everyone, not to alienate. And it's like, you belong with my family, but off you go, you don't think, believe. If we have a denomination, which it is, that's based around believing a certain way and behaving a certain way, man, the conformity and control that has to come. I believe we have to go bigger than doctrines, that we actually need to have a set of holistic values that we live by. And we live by grace, by love, by kindness, by authenticity, by healing. And that if everything, I used to look at people that shared something and something inside me shut me down. And other people, when they spoke and were with me, my spirit opened up. And that helped me know which is good for me and which isn't. Not what sounds the most logical, which gives me life. And it brings me to Dad. My dad used to always use a text in every sermon, and I've tried it too. Jesus said, I've come to give you life and give it more abundantly. And my question always is, what opens me up to give me more life and fullness of life? Not theoretically, but in my spirit, my soul, my body, my being. What can I do with others to awaken them to that life? And I don't need to control another's journey and tell them how to live.
No.
I want to call to the better part in people. And I want to accept the weaknesses, the failings, the shadows, the darknesses, and let them, like what I learned from Jesus, and it's my nature, but I learned even more from Jesus. The people that were on the edges, the people that were marginalised, the people that didn't fit the system, they were so comfortable with Jesus. He didn't hammer them. He didn't take them down. And I just think organised religion is a human thing. And it trips up people so bad. And like, I've read so many books about Jesus. There's so many ways to understand, and I value them all. I don't have the definitive answer of Jesus and salvation, and I don't need it. But what I do know from the stories of Jesus is how profound that way of being is. And it's not easy. But how rich a life it is to step into the deeper things, not the literal things. To step into the essence of life and love and grace, and letting go of all that perfection stuff and the fear and the shame. How much healing and growth goes, instead of me having to tell someone how to do their faith, is letting people blossom. I will water and fertilize the plants, but I'm not going to tell them what plant they have to be and how to grow. Okay, lots of tears.
Graeme, I'd love you to write in the comments below after some of what you think would be holistic values that are important for a group to remember and to share, and to gather around as they share their different opinions and beliefs. And there's so many things we could keep talking about, but I just want to thank you for taking the time today, for sharing your heart. I want to encourage people to send some love hearts now as they
I love that.
we say thank you to Graeme for speaking to us so openly and honestly today.
I need to bring one last thing that I didn't say.
I was going to say, I'd like
the whole thing about the
one
Pakistan thing, that's around the time where I could never be the same again. And I'm looking at all of these crazy things that happen in the church. And look what's happening in our world. The environment's getting ripped to shreds. The sea's getting polluted. The control that's happening, the dysfunction in politics, the people getting hurt with racism, the wars, everything. And it's like, it just comes back to me. If we're not part of the healing, what are we? We are needed to be healers. We need to get the Spirit of Jesus. And back in the day, it was like the people following forward were seen as the enemy and therefore deserve to be taken down. And Jesus said, love your enemies. Even those that don't like the direction, don't like the people, don't like the ideas, and put people up as enemies. Can we love them? And that even goes for those of us who might be on other parts of the spectrum. How do we find a way? Like, I admire about you, and I saw this early days at Yarra happening. We had a furor after Steve Wald did one sermon on grace at summer camps when the big explosion of amazing things happened. And you sat in the middle at lunch that went all half the afternoon, and you listened to the people that were from all the parts of the spectrum, and there were people wanting to attack Steve and attack you and everything, and you just listened and drew out and you unified, not changing everyone, but listening. And like, you carry that on, and I see you having a beautiful role in what you're doing with this series.
Thank you.
We need to be humans together, connect with our hearts.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this is a safe space where people can feel they can actually, from all sides of the spectrum, share their story.
That's it for me. It's not really, but it is for now. And it's really touched me, and it helps weave parts of my life into a better whole and remind me of why I'm here on this planet.
You please engage with people in the comments, and I think that's one of the great things about this particular platform is we can keep the conversation going on. Iris said some beautiful additional things in the comments after her her interview yesterday. I'd like to put a special invitation out to people to join me tonight at Campfire Songs. I'll put a link up a little bit later. We're starting at 6:30 Australian time, AEST, is that right? And I think it's going to be particularly following on from this conversation. I'm actually going to cancel my next meeting, which was going to be between now and Campfire Songs, because of just some of the emotions that you've kind of raised in me today, and I want to just sit on those just quietly for the next little while, and then in 2 hours I want to just share some devotional music, and I'd love you to join me if you can. And anyone watching, I'm going to put a link up. I might just put it in the comments here, because it's a private group. You need to be a member, and let's just kind of enter into a space together where we can just share some of those feelings that are stirred with beautiful music. So I encourage you and anyone to join us there.
Thank you, Pastor Peter.
No. I want to be forgotten 50 years after I'm gone. And I think we should invite, near the end, we're going to let Jill have the last word of this particular series. And then, as I said, the next series will be interviewing and listening to women. I'm going to explore that one next. But it'd be interesting to get John Godfrey back just sometime before the end. I kind of shortened his interview accidentally, and I'd love to hear some of his thoughts as he's watched and listened to some of these conversations. Thank you, Graeme. Until next time.
My hearts are everyone's hearts. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're back in 2025, and I was watching and listening that whole time, but I thought I'd take myself off the screen because it was distracting me, seeing myself and myself watching myself and watching Graeme. But what a fabulous conversation that was 5 years ago. The content as relevant then as it is now. And how sad to relive and witness some of that pain that was visibly moving Graeme during that interview. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Just look what came in the mail yesterday. Thank you, Gillian Ford, sending me a copy. Beyond Glacier View, Volume 9. And I have all the volumes, and I'm hoping that a Volume 10 comes out as well. But what an incredible job you've done, Gillian. There are so many interesting letters, articles, thoughts, and it's in this nice big format where you can just easily read, and there's pictures and nice size font. So thank you very much, Gillian Ford, for all your hard work in putting this series together. And guys, you can go and buy this on Amazon and get your own copy as well. Well, tomorrow we have Emma Ray leading our Good News Fellowship. Can't wait. And I invite you all to join us. Until next time, everybody, we will see you again. Thank you. Lots on next week, and what a big week it has been. Ryan Day, Dr. Alan Davis, Graeme Frauenfelder, and a wonderful gospel session tomorrow. See you, everybody. Take care.